Jez Mack says, "Hey Phil, I saw your Court review the other day and I was left wondering if at 24 million guitars from this one manufacturer, in the name of sustainability, do you think we'll reach peak guitar?" Okay, so let me clarify what I think he's getting at there. So I did the Court review of the X700. They were nice to send one out. They sent them out to a bunch of channels, and that was very nice of them. In my video, I mentioned that Court has hit its 50th anniversary this year, and that in that 50 years, they have made 24 million guitars. And the thing to note about that is that isn't divided by 50 years. It's definitely a ramp up. Okay, so it looks like this. You know, if you're looking at it like a stock chart, it's the bulk of those guitars have been coming in the last recent years. So that's a lot of damn guitars. And so to Jez Mack's question is, at what point, you know, do they reach the peak? In other words, you know, they're making so many guitars. At what point? Especially since a lot of these guitars don't go away, and every guitar they compete with. That was why Fender had trouble getting its IPO. They got called out by the New York Times for saying, like, you know, at least when Apple comes out with a new iPhone, their old iPhone's obsolete because it's outdated technology in some cases. Where Fender, you know, they said, this is what the article said. It even said, like, their artists that they endorse and sponsor, like Eric Clapton, say they like the older ones even better. So every time Fender makes a guitar, it's like that guitar they made is competing with a new guitar they're going to make in the future. And what that article was missing, in my opinion, so you know, is this wall. This. I told you, you know, there's terms that I just can't get on board with, right? When people say a guitar doesn't have a soul, I'm like, yeah. My joke is, if it had a soul, it was when it was a live tree and we killed it. But you're supposed to have a soul, and maybe you can play with soul. There's another term that also gets me, which is need and want. Who needs 5 guitars? How many guitars you need? And I always say, you don't need any guitars. You know, ask people around the world going through horrible tragedies of, you know, whatever's going on, Mother Nature problems, you know, wars. Ask them how many guitars they need. They're going to say none. They need food. We need weapons. We need shelter. That's what they need. That's what things you need. These are luxury items. And when people say whoever, you know, $3,000 guitar is a luxury item, a $30 guitar is a luxury item. The very first guitar I ever got, which was my JB Player with used an amp and cable and strap, was $130 with tax. Was definitely a luxury item for me, and it was definitely a luxury item for my mother to pay for at that time in my life. And it was as luxury as anything I own on this wall. In fact, if you were to take what I make now versus what my mom made when she bought me that first guitar, none of these guitars has ever had any close to effect of me hurting me financially as it did that one guitar hurt my mother. You know, she had to adjust our food for the week, you know, to get me a guitar. That's a luxury item for sure. So her, knucklehead son could play guitar, and God bless her for that. My point is that this is a luxury item, and we are mostly hobbyists. And the best part is when people try to attack hobbyists, which I always defend, because the argument I always say is flawed. Billy Gibbons is a talented artist, but he is a collector and a hobbyist. I'm sorry if it triggers and pisses you off. Eddie Van Halen is an amazing artist, and he's a collector and a hobbyist. You can be all of these things. Some musicians that I've interviewed and met over the years, they are not hobbyists. They're legitimately not hobbyists. They have 5 guitars and they have 8 Ferraris, and that's what they're hobbyists for. They're into their cars, right? They're into their, their jet skis and their other things. I mean, you can be into other things. So some people are not into guitars, just guitars. Some people just like making music. You know, and you can just make music with anything. Some of us are hobbyists. Some of us are hobbyists and artists, right? Some of us are players. Some of us are players and hobbyists and collectors. Where's the peak? Where does this end? They're making so many guitars. There's only so many humans on the planet Earth. Well, it doesn't matter how many humans there are. We're fanatically crazy. We're hanging out on a Friday. There's probably 1,000 of you. There's 1,281 of you hanging out watching me talk about this crap. I mean the thing we all love. Right? In fact, right now, screw how many people are watching or listening to this live right now. You know how many spouses and friends and significant others right now are listening to this going in the background, rolling their eyes going, oh God, what the hell's wrong with you and this guy on YouTube. so that's what I'm saying. We're gas addicts said addict. Right. We're addicts. We're addicted to it. I told you guys, if I suddenly started making millions of dollars, there would not be a row of cars in front of my house. It'd be dumber guitars. I wouldn't buy super crazy expensive guitars. I just can't do it. Like, I'm not buying $20,000 guitars, even if I had crazy money to throw away. I just can't do it. But it would get sillier. It would definitely get sillier. It's because I already know this, because as I've done better in my life, I have gotten sillier with it. And so I think that's what's going to happen. Talk about this. It's 24 million guitars made by Court Tech, and 5 million guitar players bought them all. So that's what we're doing. We're buying them all. And there you go. And that really lends to another argument that's always comes up, which is, and I've heard this one a lot. I've heard that the hobbyists and collectors, the negative of it, well, hobby and collecting is essentially hoarding. As I've always pointed out, everybody's got to get through their life, however they got to get through it. And there's worse things you can do with your money than buy guitars with it, for you and for other people in your life. The one thing that I heard that's always been an interesting argument, and I'm not arguing the argument. I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. I'm going to tell you the argument, and I'm going to give you my side. The argument is that hobbyists make it impossible or harder for professionals to buy quality instruments, because they buy up all these old vintage guitars. The hobbyists buy up all these, high-end guitars, and then the professionals, they can't afford them. They can't afford to buy these guitars. And a perfect example is, I'll use a vintage guitars, right? The hobbyists drive up the vintage guitar prices to the point where professional musicians can't even buy them, and I don't mean like the Joe Bonamassas who are rich. I'm talking about professional musicians who are not rich, right? Most professional musicians are lucky to make just above livable wages. My counter argument, my devil's advocate argument is that the collectors also drive down guitar pricing. It is one and the same. Yes, collectors buy up the really good quality guitars, and they make it impossible for a professional, especially a working professional in the hometown. There's no way they can buy it. Like, somebody will say, hey, because of hobbyists, a working professional in town trying to play gigs can't buy an American Strat. But I agree with you. But also, because of hobbyists, it's why a Mexican Strat and a Squire is getting so damn good. Because they really want to sell you 10 guitars. No guitar company that I've ever talked to, interviewed, or talked to, especially behind the scenes, have ever said, what we want is every guitar player to have one of our guitars. They go, no, they want them to have 10. They want you to buy more guitars. And so they increase the quality of the guitars, and they get really cutthroat with the pricing, and that kind of opens up some better quality guitars at lower prices. That is an argument. By the way, that is not my argument to say the first statement is not true. I'm just giving you two sides of that coin, because in some cases, one of those things can be true, both-sided. BC Rich 581. There are not that many professional musicians, like Phil said, usually don't earn enough to buy expensive vintage guitars. This is true. It's a declining, it's declining out there. The reality is that we all are musicians, and we all love this. And nobody wants to see anybody, unhappy with it. That's what's great about this. That's why I said, I always think it's funny. And the reason I always get defensive, it's not because I look at myself as a hobbyist and then I'm like, I'm a hobbyist and they're making fun of hobbyists or they're hard on hobbyists. It's because I rarely see the opposite argument. I never see the hobbyists complaining about the professionals, right? It's this argument that somehow one side is more, evil or vain than the other. And the reality is, like I said, we're all just people who are passionate about the guitars we love and music. The commonality is the strength, not the differences. That's just for the record. If you enjoyed this podcast clip, you can watch the entire episode by clicking the link in the description or streaming it on iTunes, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. You can also join it live every week, Friday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, know your gear.